Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu anbiya wal mursalin. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin Fatih lima ughliq wal fatih lima sabaq. Nasrul haq bihaq wa hadi ila siratal mustaqim wa ala alihi al azim. Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, everyone. May peace be upon you wherever you are, together with your family and loved ones. We pray that all of you are in good health, well-being, and in a state of good iman, inshallah. Amin. Okay, welcome to another night of event online at Sudilahi, conversation in Ramadan. This is a continuation of what we had last week, alhamdulillah, with Dr. Omar, Mahmoud, and Shaykh Aziz Fredericks. We are blessed to have them again on board to touch on the same topic, living with depressions and anxiety. But this time, what we're going to do is we ask a few questions, but we will open to question and answer this time, because quite a number of people last week, they were asking us like, can we ask the Shaykh some of the questions, and many of you respond positively for that. Asking us for that. So here we are, right? So we have Shaykh Aziz, who is regular at South Ilahi, murid of Habib Mashallah Haddad, and he is known to many of us, alhamdulillah, one of our beloved Shaykh. And also we have Dr. Omar Mahmoud again, who is also regular at our event, who is a murid of Habib Omar bin Hafiz and professional psychologist. Both are always regular at our annual event, Shaykh Problem. So I'd like to bring them both on the screen right now, and as we go start this important topic that everybody is discussing, inshallah. Right? So Assalamualaikum, Shaykh and Dr. Omar. How are you? How both of you?
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm well in this side. Hope you are too.
You're good. We just had finished our Trawih, alhamdulillah. And it's interesting that Doctor and Shaykh is still waiting for their iftar. And Dr. Omar is first, and then
7 more hours. 7 more hours, alhamdulillah.
May Allah ease you, Shaykh. Alhamdulillah. So today we're going to keep on discussing about this issue, this topic, and I have some set of questions. I will only ask you questions, but I think the rest of it is a Q&A from those who had sent us since last week. We have so much demand, we have so much question. But I know that Dr. Omar had to leave, so please be so. Shaykh Abdul will continue, but don't worry, Doctor. Yeah, we appreciate, despite all your busy schedule, you're here with us. May Allah bless you. And alhamdulillah, we're going to start first with zikr again. Last week we mentioned, Dr. Omar mentioned, and even Shaykh Abdul mentioned about the zikr and the balance of medicine and zikr, the therapy, in a way balance it. So this question comes when I was discussing with Ainun, and we met some people. It was actually interesting. We talked about zikr and co-reflection as a way to heal. We heard that music can heal the soul. Toma, you're also a musician. Can you elaborate on the role of music and how it affects one's state? How true is this in the Islamic perspective? I know the last year, the Shaykh Problem, you mentioning about the Qasida, Habib Ali Habshi, mashallah, how it resonates with the connection of the soul in understanding Tawheed and how things happen through Allah's mercy, right? So in this question, we like to ask you first, what is your answer to music healing the soul?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Yeah, I think, it's not just music, but anything that you intake into your being through your senses. So what you see, what you hear, all of the things all the information that you process without a doubt, it has an effect on your mental state, on your spiritual state. It reaches the heart at some point. And we know that music is one of the most powerful of these sort of external forces that can cause a shift in your internal state. There's something about the rhythm, there's something about the melody, there's something about it that just immediately attaches to the human being. And if any of you have heard even just a nursery rhyme that you remember when you were a child, and if you hear it later in life, suddenly all these memories come back to you of, you know, a little song, the alphabet song, or something you learned in kindergarten, and it literally can take you back to another place and time. So without a doubt, you know, musical notes, musical input has an effect on the heart and soul and the mental state of a human. So that could be positive or negative, you know, and we have to be wary of that. I think many of the scholars who caution against music, we are talking about certain types of music and content that may promote things that are not within our Islamic values. So, and that's one of the dangers there, is that people would listen to certain kinds of music, get influenced a certain way, or maybe even just get lulled into a sense of sleep, in terms of how conscious they are of the realities of the world. On the same side, though, there are many types of musical traditions, and they're very common all across the Muslim world. And if, you know, obviously, I think one of the most prominent examples of this is in the Mawlid celebrations. If you're in any traditional Muslim country, majority of Muslims around the world will be celebrating some type of Mawlid time. Also, there's songs that come out during Ramadan, for Eid. There's just so many different musical traditions in the Muslim world, and they have positive messages and they have positive content. And many of our scholars, you know, see no problem with that, because it actually promotes you and within you a sense of dhikr, of remembrance, turning towards Allah. And the most powerful of these are the qasidas, which are basically du'as that are turned into poetic musical form. And, you know, we don't need to get into the debates, or I'll let Shaykh Aziz comment on that. If there's debates on what is it, instruments, non-instruments, certain types of instruments, but regardless, it's very clear that, you know, there's an effect of positive spiritual singing, nasheeds, rhymed poetry, rhythmic sounds that seem to have a meditative effect on the person, and also can promote many positive spiritual awakenings, and mental state for that. So there's a whole field in psychology called music therapy, you know, where they'll use music to improve a person's mental state. So I think even in the secular world, or in the quote unquote modern world, they recognize that there's even studies where they'll show people singing in a choir together, and when they're singing together, their cardiac responses start to synchronize. So their hearts literally actually start to beat in a certain rhythm together. A certain unity starts to form. Yeah. So if you think of when we apply that to Muslim circles, when we're all in circles doing dhikr and reciting qasidas together, we're actually creating a social, psychological impact on all of our mental states, all of our spiritual states simultaneously. So I think that's something to consider. That's my general view on it. And I think that's why the gatherings, the majalis, have persisted for so long, over centuries, in our communities, because it has a clear positive effect on the mental and spiritual state.
Inshallah, Doctor. I think even for myself, I'm a musician, and the effect is I can feel, because I play a different type of music, like you know. And then when I left the music scene, the Qasida and the Maulud somehow awakened into a different, I felt like it was a different realm, and it suddenly changes your state. But coming to Shaykh Abdul, what is your take on it, Shaykh? Since you're the Shaykh and we're asking you on heavy metal.
Specifically heavy metal.
Yeah,
I think I remember having this. I remember having this question in one of your durus, Richard Blackmore,
knocking on the heaven door, and but that's the thing, Shay. The thing is, like I was saying to Dr. Omar, I was also from music scene, and when we left, we felt the void. I left. I mean, I'm talking about myself. I felt about 20 years ago. But my journey was unblessed. I met someone like Habib Ali bin Jafar Ali Drus and all that. And that's how I get to know about what Dr. Omar was saying, the Qasida and everything. But somehow, certain time, it still does come back. And I have many musician friends who sometimes I felt that they are empty, they feel void, and they can't live without music. Sort of like addiction, but it's not. I think I asked you before when you say like, quote unquote, maybe I'm wrong, you can correct me, but don't sue me. You can go in, just like you said, something like hal, like when you used to play the guitar and then suddenly like, okay. So what's your take on it here? And we can go on this discussion. Yeah.
Right, Jazakumullah khair, and may Allah reward Dr. Omar. He gave a very good answer. So I'd just like to kind of develop his answers a little bit further. First, one of the things he mentioned was that the senses are actually the door to the heart. This is something which is very clear in the way that Ghazali and other scholars describe the relationship between hearing, seeing, smelling, how all of these senses are the doors for entering into the heart. So you need to protect your nose, you need to protect your eyes, you need to protect your ear, you need to protect your mouth, because all of these things will affect what happens in your heart. So for this reason, music has two ways into the heart. One is through the sound, but also through association. And Dr. Omar had mentioned about how it takes you back to a certain place when you listen to the nursery rhyme.
Yeah.
Now, within music therapy, this is one of the, and I touched on Lego therapy last time. Music therapy is also a very, very powerful way to deal with things like mental health, depression, even trauma. And I know from some of the kids that I've worked with that the best therapists have been the music therapists and the play therapists. Now, why does this work, and how does this relate to what Dr. Omar was saying about the key to the heart? It's because music is very, very, very powerful. It's probably the most powerful influence that you can have on the heart. And that's why it needs to be limited. And that's why the Sharia comes to put limits on what music is permitted and what music isn't permitted. And the reason is not because music is in itself haram, it's because it's very, very powerful and therefore needs to have some limits. And as Dr. Omar said, there is difference of opinion on what those limits are. And even somebody, you're talking about journeys, alhamdulillah, I was blessed to spend about 15 years in good company with Yusuf Islam Cat Stevens and shared a lot of the difficulties the challenges that he was going through as an individual, and some very personal stories that we had related to music. But alhamdulillah, one of the reasons why he at one point took the position that all music is haram or was because of association, because in his mind, a lot of the music was associated with a particular time and a particular place.
Yeah.
And I think that, so I'm not saying that he was wrong, because that is a very strict and strong opinion. But what I would like to tease out is, why is it so important, the association, and how does it relate to things, because the topic here is about depression and mental health. How does it affect your mental state? One of the things it does, it takes you to a place. And when you're talking about sometimes it takes you back to a place, it's because of the association with that time and that place, which is why my personal position with what is halal or what is halal and not halal surrounds three main issues. One is the time that the music is being, the time of the music. The time affects whether it's permissibility. It's one of these things that are mubah, in my understanding. And the reason why is because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once in a gathering where they were reading Quran. And then he allowed them to stop, and then they started to recite poetry. And when we say recite poetry in Arabic, we mean singing qasaid. It's recitation, is methodic, is melodic, and it's not maybe like it's not heavy metal, but it's certainly melodic. So they moved from reading Quran to the singing or recitation of poetry. Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq walked in and he asked, a Quran or shi'r ya Rasulullah. He says, are you having Quran and poetry in the same gathering? And then the Prophet ﷺ said, Sa'atan, sa'atan. An hour for this and an hour for, that's the literal translation, an hour for this and an hour for that. And another narration of a different hadith, very similar, he said, روحوا قلوبكم ساعة ساعة. Bring peace, bring calmness to your heart, an hour, meaning that there should be a time for this relaxation of the heart, of entering into the process of music. You can't play music when it's the Jumu'ah prayer. You have to hasten to this particular act, to the remembrance of. So therefore, the time is important. The second is the place. But if the place is a place which renders this music, the association of this music, is something haram, that is haram. So the discos, the discos and places where alcohol, that negates and forbids that kind of music. And then the third is what it calls you to. So where you have satanic music, and there's no doubt that a lot of music is satanic. It's based on addressing the most basic instinct in a human being, the devilish instincts. Some of it is, there was a time where there's certain Swedish and Finnish rock bands who, whenever they played, there would be churches burnt, because the kind of music they were calling people to was demonic, was satanic. And then there's other music which is purely lustful, and the whole purpose of this was to raise the so these three elements make music haram, but beyond those three elements, it's permitted. And also these three things should then help you to understand the association and how it can be used to benefit people. And music therapy is very, very powerful, in that sometimes when a person is traumatized, sometimes just playing a certain type of music, or sometimes getting into the music to bring back, and it can benefit a lot of people. Just give you one example to relate to your own personal situation about rock music. I can remember a very, very good friend of mine. He became Muslim. He was from the same background that you're talking about. He was a great, he still is a great guitarist. But he put all of that behind him when he became Muslim, and he'd become this person which, he thought a Muslim should be, big beard. But I knew that wasn't him. Lovely Scottish guy, I love him very, very dearly. But I knew there was something different to him. But we never talked about. Then one day we were driving to a prison up north together to visit a prisoner who'd contacted me. I didn't know this guy, but we just. And then out of the blue, he just turned to me and he said, I saw a guitar and I nearly bought it the other day. I turned to him, I says, what guitar was it? He says, it was a Strad. It was a Strad. Says, why and how much was it? And then he looked at me, he says, so you know what a Strad is? And then we started talking, and the rest of the journey was about music. And you could see him starting to reconnect with his past, not in a bad way, but to start to make sense of his past. And alhamdulillah, we just left that. We never talked about music until I met his brother. And his brother turned up with a Thin Lizzy t-shirt on. He was really, really miserable. Why the hell am I doing here with all these Muslims? And I walked in and I saw his t-shirt and I said, so which guitarist was the best guitarist ever played with Thin Lizzy? He looked at me, who the hell are you for a start? And he said, and I said, well, I disagree. I think it was so-and-so. And then we had this long conversation. And then afterwards, you could see how the two brothers had built a relationship around music. So this association helped him to get in touch with who he really was. And if you meet him now compared to those days, he's at peace with himself. He doesn't go out gigging, but he's certainly dealt with his journey. And the same way Yusuf Islam dealt with his journey and you've dealt with your journey, music is part of a lot of people's journey. And to deny it would actually deny who they are. And sometimes music helps people to get in touch with who they are and to tease out things that have happened in their life into associations, etc. So it's got many, many benefits and some dangers.
Yeah, but Mukhir, what about those people who, like my group of friends, which I mentioned to you, they are struggling as a musician because at one point in your life, you are looking into the direction where am I heading? And you also mentioned about the fiqh, like haram, and there are places where you shouldn't play. There's some music that you should avoid. because of certain element in it, because it gives the heart to people and all that. But how do these people then? I almost every year I met them and we had this conversation. But for me, I don't want to force them to change because I know it's difficult. It's like you're breaking someone, you know. So how do they gradually grow, or they have to remain as a musician then throughout their life?
I mean, my dealing, alhamdulillah, we mix in the same circle. So I know the kind of people you're talking about, and many lovely, lovely people, some Muslim, some not Muslim. And but this statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is very, very important. Sa'atan, sa'atan, an hour for this, an hour for that. So one of the keys is not to say music is haram. The key is to get people to understand when music is haram, what makes it haram, so they can understand that, but also that they can get a balance between time, so that they can understand, okay, playing music, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but sa'at, you also need to give your soul some other kind of food, which is a different kind of direction. And so once people start to yearn for something more than that scene, because the reason you left the scene is not because of the music, but because of the scene. So to get out of that scene, you were looking for something else. So what you need to give them is an opportunity to find that what they're looking for. Sa'atan, sa'atan, a time for this and a time for that. And getting that balance right is very important. And then trying to protect yourself from danger is another important thing, is that you know what your limits are. You know what your limits are. You know that when you go down a certain road, it's going to take you into haram. And everybody knows what that road is. It's an individual road. You need to know that's something you need to close the door to. And everybody's road is different. And I'll give you some examples of one of the best times that I was involved in Dawah was when I was involved with some Rastafarians. And there was one particular Rasta who was from Jamaica. And the difference was I was living in Leicester in the UK, where all of the pseudo Rastas were all guys from Leicester like me. I'm from Nottingham, but they were all really English Jamaicans. They don't know anything about Jamaica. Now this real Jamaican was a real Rasta who spoke with a strong Kingston accent. He walked with a stick and he had locks which he'd never cut for since he was 16. And he became Muslim and we became very close friends. Now he used to go every Saturday night. First of all, he came to my house. We had curried goat, traditional Jamaican dish. And then they go from our palaka to a special place where it was an illegal joint for playing music and smoking substances which were not permitted. But every week we used to go there together. And we just used to talk to people for about 15 minutes. We just used to go in. And as soon as he walked in, he immediately got respect because he was a real Rasta, whereas they were pseudo-Rastas looking up to him. So when we talked about Islam, it was very easy for us. And the next thing was they would all come, instead of going straight to the blues joint, as they used to call it, they'd come to us first. And then slowly, every single week, there would be different people becoming Muslim. Now that's, we were safe, so to speak, in terms of that wasn't taking us down a dangerous road. Now, I wouldn't recommend that to many people unless they themselves know who they are in terms of their capacity to prevent that going down that road. My own teacher said, Omar Abdul bin Abu Bakr bin Salim, he used to go to the pubs in London on a regular basis, just used to go and greet everybody, drink an orange juice and say, how's everybody, and leave. People used to ask him why. One day somebody became Muslim in there. And the way that they became Muslim, he says, I love you very much. I love you very much. And I love Islam, but I can't become Muslim. He says, why? He says, because, and the guy says, because I could never give up alcohol. What did Sayyid Omar Abdullah say? He said, have you not met Muslims that drink? Have you not met Muslims that drink? And then he realized, actually, I can still become Muslim. Alhamdulillah, wallah, he didn't drink alcohol from that day. But the fact that Sayyid Omar Abdullah was capable of doing this because of his state, he knows where he's at. Most Muslim musicians need to know where are they at in terms of their own personal journey. And then they need to decide what roads are going to take them into difficulties spiritually and mentally, because that scene is a dangerous scene for the mental state. It's a dangerous place to go down. They can know what state how to deal with that based on their own state. And alhamdulillah, Yusuf Islam is more effective in his da'wah than he's ever been. One of the reasons why, he's out, he's himself, he's confident, he's at peace with himself, and his music is better now than it ever was. And he's performing regularly. Alhamdulillah, he's going to be in, if the lockdown is over, he'll be back in Glasgow in a few.
MashaAllah.
Playing a concert.
MashaAllah.
Tough and a long answer.
I think it's interesting here because we have so many musicians watching this, and they were messaging me, and they were saying like, "Inshallah, thank you for Shaykh Abdul Aziz explaining this," because many of them looking for a way out. They are looking for, okay, how do we deal with this, especially if they are full-time musicians, you know. So now that you give them the details, and I think they need to sort it out and learn how to go get along with it. So I think we're moving on from music. I think we can talk like 2 hours about music, but then there's other issues that involve, right? I'd like to touch on this with you and Dr. Omar on grief. I think this is important. A lot of people are going through right now, especially unexpected death. I think death, I remember Ainun was telling me about when we said about whether you want to cover death, Imam Ghazali, the 40 principle, right? That somehow hit me when Ainun, when we got married, he said, the book that really affected me in my entire life is The Remembrance of Death by Imam Ghazali. She said like, at one time when she was reading, she just, couldn't sleep and cry. So we can understand, especially people who unexpectedly their loved one passed away. For me, both of my parents, we sort of expect it because they have a long chronic illness, right? But for most people, recently I have so many friends who lost their loved one, not to pandemic, not to corona, but other issues, so unexpectedly. So we talk about depression, which is much more prolonged state, but this grief, right, Shaykh, caused by death of loved one, it can be sudden, as I mentioned to you, and have effects on our life because we are not expecting it. So how do we differentiate between healthy grieving and grief that leads to depression? And I guess some people were saying like, and this is why we shouldn't wailing, we shouldn't, over exaggerating in our tears and all that. So Shaykh, I think people will want to hear from what you say in terms of Islamic spiritual perspective.
I think there's 2 aspects to this. One is the dhahir, the outward forms, and one is the inward forms. And I think that if I understand correctly, the question is what is permitted and what is not, or what is the limit, or when does grief become dangerous and
it's more like what
negative.
Is a healthy way to respond?
Outward forms. Okay, healthy grief and unhealthy grief. So I shouldn't really be answering this. It should be Dr. Omar. But my limited understanding of this is that unhealthy grief is when it debilitates you inside, where it stops you from functioning normally. And when somebody has debilitating grief, where their sadness actually stops them from functioning, then that means the grief is in psychological or mental terms to be extremely unhealthy. So when does it so what is healthy grief? What does healthy grief look like? Let's talk specifically about death. Death is inevitable. That's why it's called in Arabic yaqeen, certainty. So it will definitely happen. You will lose people and you will die. This is something that we all need to know. How you relate to death will in part depend on how you understand death. And when you understand that death is a phase and that the person's spirit travels through this journey, and just as my mother and father were in this state that I'm in now, they were in that state, and now they're in another state, which is that they're dead, they've passed on. But I will also be in that state, and then there will be another state after that where we will be together again. So if you understand death in this way, it doesn't remove the grief, because the fact that my father and mother are not there, and is always going to be painful. My father died more than 30 years ago, and it's still affects me. My mother, even more. The sadness of my mother, it sometimes overwhelms me. I remember just, sometimes it just overwhelms. But the reason why I still think it is a healthy grief is because it doesn't debilitate me. It doesn't stop me from functioning. It doesn't stop me from praying. It doesn't stop me from. But sometimes grief hits somebody so hard that they stop praying, that they stop dealing with life, that they stop functioning. And this is where it becomes an unhealthy thing. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ set some limits. And you're right to say loud grieving, to wail. So crying is good, but crying with a loud sound is not good. Visiting the graves is good on a regular basis. And that's another important thing, is that you make it a regular thing, because sometimes just going once in a while, it doesn't have the same effect. But actually visiting regularly means that you have this almost this regular connection. So these are the kind of things that you can differentiate between the two. Really, Dr. Omar is a more appropriate to answer.
Yeah, but I think you are right, Shaykh. I think when you said about
Hopefully he'll give the correct answer now.
Yeah, I think you are right, Shaykh, because I also experienced it. Like my mother had passed away 9 years ago, and then when I still think about her, I still cried. But I was taught by all the mashayikh, it's like read Fatiha and said Alhamdulillah, and what you say is true. You cannot escape from it. I think that's subhanallah in embracing it, right? Yeah. Okay, now it's Dr. Martin to share his point of view now, and we like to hear Dr. saying, inshallah.
Yeah, grief. Yeah, subhanallah. It's a natural state. That's another thing to remind everyone. It's a natural state to grieve. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you if you're feeling depressed after the loss of a loved one. Even the Prophet ﷺ, when he lost Ibrahim, his son, he specifically said, "In bifaraqika, by you leaving us, Ibrahim, we are mahzunun. We are people who have been afflicted with sadness." And it just comes to you. It's not really your choice. It just kind of comes to you, and you're mahzun in that sense. And we have to recognize that it's part of the struggle of being alive. You start forming connections with people who are also alive, and then, as Shaykh Abdul says, people move on to the next realm, and you feel that sense of loss. And so it's natural to feel sad, to feel like you're missing the person, to feel upset, but it shouldn't go on for so long, and it shouldn't be so debilitating, as Shaykh Abdul said. And I think the other thing about like crying loudly and grieving very loudly, I'm cautious, because I don't want to tell people how they should grieve. Everybody kind of grieves in their own way. Some people become very isolated, some people become very interactive, and everything in between. So I don't want to say we should dictate how people should grieve, but we should recognize that there's a social element. So like I remember, seeing some families, they become very angry when they lose a loved one, and it's like as if God has done something to them, and as there's a big injustice in the world, and I should have had more time with this person, and why is this happening? And so then they go through months and maybe even years of bitter anger based on related to this death, and then it affects everyone kind of in the family, and it has this very negative way of looking at things. And when I saw that, I knew in my heart that I don't want to be that kind of person that grieves that way, because it looks very draining and very acidic, for one's own heart. And then there are some people who they go through very like dramatic and sad moments, and then it kind of like they finally calm down, and then another relative will show up who's also very dramatic, and they'll start crying, and then it'll get the original family member also crying. And so there's this compound social effect. But if everyone is sort of grieving on a calm, if you have a couple people around you who are calm, forces in your life, those are always good people to surround you with in moments of grief. When my mom passed away, Allah yarhamha, she died just last August actually, and one of my closest friends Enes Khan, and he came up and drove directly the next day up to him just to stay with me. He didn't say much, didn't do anything, but his presence there was just very calming for me. And then that helps you in your grieving process, because to counterbalance kind of the dramatic and melodramatic kind of sadness that can come, if you have, you know, people you can connect to who also will keep you grounded, keep you calm, put things in perspective. And I mentioned this before at the, you know, Sot Ilahi, you know, at Sacred Path, but I think my mom's, her own attitude towards death helped me in my grieving process, which was, my mom was not afraid of death. And she made that very clear. She made that very clear. She would always talk to us about death. She would always kind of mention it. It would make us uncomfortable, like in the family, like, Mom, why are you always talking about, she would say, like, when I die, make sure this happens. And when I die, make sure you do this at my grave, you know? And we would always be like, why are you bringing up this right now, Mom? Like, it's not even in the middle of dinner. It wasn't really relevant, but she would just bring it up. She brought it up so many times that it actually, in our own psychological understanding, we started to realize she's not really freaking out about death. And if your mom is scared of something, you're naturally going to be scared of it. But if your mom is not scared, you would start to feel more confident, more calm about it. So when she passed, that was actually one of the most comforting things, to recall those times when she was alive and how calm she talked about death. So if I know that in her death, she's not actually scared, she's fine, she's in her own, she's in the next realm, that's all it is for her, then for me, in my grieving process, I feel more calm, you know? And so now I'm thinking about, what message do I want to send to my family when I talk to my kids about death? I want them to also understand death is normal, it's part of the process, so that what happens is, many families, we don't talk about death at all. So then when it happens, everybody has no clue how to react, and it's very scary. But if it's something normalized, part of the conversation, it's kind of brought up regularly, then when the actual tragedy happens, of course, you're still going to feel the sadness, you're still going to feel the grief, but it won't have that shocking value where you're like, how could this happen? You know, because death was not something even on your radar. But in families, that people that talk about it, I think it's something on their radar, so they can adjust to it easier.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Shaykh. Doctor, it's actually very important. Your answer and your guide on this. I think a lot of us could relate to it, and I think it's important for us to understand being human and responding it in a certain way. Not everybody will be the same, but at least we could have understand and learn to manage the emotional stages. You know? Thank you very much. My next question is relating back to last week before Dr. Omar leaving. This is the question from him first. Between mental health and gene again. And in the previous conversation we had on gene and mental illness, I just wanted to be more specific on this particular illness and schizophrenia, for example. Schizophrenia. We have some participants who attended and talk about their parents having schizophrenia and all that. Among the symptoms of schizophrenia is hallucination or delusion, such as talking to someone who is not there. And just to elaborate further, how can you tell that it is schizophrenia and not jinn? Because people say that they might be talking to a jinn. You know, they have this multiple character and so on. So, Doctor, would you like to share with us then?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. You know, we always talk about jinn, and it's unavoidable, I guess. It just, Muslims love talking about it. It's very interesting, because like I was the other day I was reading, just going through some qira'ah of Quran, and came to Surah Jinn, and those opening ayah, like the jinn, when Allah describes them, they have very similar concerns as humans do. They have similar fears, similar misunderstandings. They get amazed by the message that the Prophet ﷺ brings as well, you know. So like, I think it's very interesting when you put it in that sense, that like, you know, I assume they have their own reality, their own lives, their own problems that they're dealing with, you know.
You need
Like
to ask your Abdul Aziz about this.
like it seems, I mean, you know, and in Yemen, every other third person has some, you know, jinn story, and Bilqis was half jinn and all this kind of stuff. So like, it's fine, but I think it's like, I'm sure they have their own lives to deal with, you know. So like, they're not like constantly, they got their own family drama, their own disobedient children, and you know, they're to come and interfere in our lives would, you know, would be, and I think that relates to the point where last time Shaykh Abdul mentioned the story Dr. Mustafa Al-Badawi mentioned, Allah yahfadhu, may Allah protect him, which was that, you know, it's very rare for clinicians like us who are Muslim, we believe in the unseen world, but it's just very rare that we come across a case where we're like, oh, this one makes me think. And I'm probably similar, like in, you know, out of thousands of patients that I've seen, maybe one I can think of who I kind of doubted, but wasn't really sure. And the symptoms of schizophrenia they're the most dramatic looking symptoms, you know. There's hallucinations, there's delusions, there's auditory, visual hallucinations sometimes. So schizophrenia sometimes is the one that really gets pinged as like the whole jinn kind of influence question. But even in that, first of all, it's a very rare disease to begin with. And in the overwhelming majority of the cases, there's an organic cause to it, you know, because you can see how it responds to certain antipsychotic medication. So I still feel like it's a very rare thing, and the default assumption that you would assume is that there's a mental health cognitive problem going on. You would not immediately assume jinn is involved. And the other thing is, like, we have to have like some level of confidence in our Islamic identity, you know. Like, if you're generally a decent person, relatively good Muslim, you don't have to be the most religious, but it's kind of those are not the type of people that jinn come to mess with, you know. Like, and we seek refuge in Allah, we ask for protection, but in the end, I also think that there's no problem with a two-pronged approach. If you really feel that there's something like black magic or some jinn involved, you can seek the traditional routes of healing and intervention along with the more quote unquote modern routes as well. It can't hurt to do both. So that's my general approach to it. I don't know if there's a way to like, you know, I think go seek help from a professional, get their opinion. It may be that the symptoms are very classically, obviously part of a certain syndrome, and then you could treat it a certain way, and see if you notice improvements in that regard. And then at the same time, keep up your spiritual protective practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you, Shaykh? What's your view on this, in terms of Islamic spirituality and Islamic scholar point of view on schizophrenia?
I think I said what I'd said last week was that it's very rare, and that we should use that as a default position. It's unlikely to be the jinn, and that we should start from a position of dealing with what's going on in this person's life. And if it happens to be the jinn, you know, I think that approach would still be the right way to address them. I think that's
Alhamdulillah, right now we have come into question and answer. We have so many questions coming in very fast. I'd like to touch on something that a lot of Singaporeans are going through. Although we are now, we call it circuit break, we are at home, working from home, but I think majority of Singaporeans are going through this, having anxiety at work, handle anxiety at work. The high stress factor caused me to be so anxious that it is really difficult to perform my daily work duties. And when I'm not performing well, it makes me feel bad and useless at myself. And I just came home feeling depressed that I have not achieved what I'm supposed to be achieving at work. So maybe Shaykh Abdul Aziz can touch on it.
I think this is to do with change. A large part of this is to do with changes in the way that we work. We're used to working with people. We're used to working with to benefit from the kind of association that two human beings or more human beings have, that you learn from each other, you interact with each other. We're social beings, and it's very difficult to do to do a job that you normally do in the group, to then be pulled out of that and then to work on their own. There are times where I can't work in a group, and I don't work in a group. There's times I'm going, and I go and I find somewhere quiet to work. But that's because I've withdrawn from the norm, which is, and it's by my choice because of a specific function. So usually, the people that are finding this anxiety my understanding would be it's because of the changes in the routine, and I think. The ways to deal with this is to try and realize that the change is a temporary change, that there will be an end to it, and between now and that point we need to work out strategies to make sure that my life is as comfortable and as beneficial as possible, and to talk to people, use whatever methods there are to communicate, to try and be as open and try and be as flexible in analyzing the roots. But in essence, it's to do with change, and there are ways to help to deal with change. And like I said, perhaps Dr. Omar is better qualified to talk about those kind of strategies.
Doctor, will you share the strategy with us?
I mean, personal change is, this is something that is part of like all our development throughout our whole lives. So we talked about this, I think last week too, people get stuck in patterns that they're comfortable with. And then even if they're not very healthy patterns, you're used to it. So to break out of the pattern, I think the first thing that you do is, it's a technique that people use like in motivational interviewing, which is they just ask yourself, am I happy with how things are right now? And is there a certain situation, set of circumstances I would be more happier in? Okay, then what can I do to get from this point to that point? And am I willing to implement those steps? Because the first part is people just recognizing that. Like once they get on that path, it's a little bit easier. But most people have a block where they're very comfortable with what they're functioning in, and they can kind of recognize something is not right, but they don't go through the mental process of like visualizing where it is they want to be and what steps do they need to go towards that, and then whether or not they're willing to actually do that. And for some people, it's kind of like, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe maybe you're not that motivated yet. Maybe once it gets to a point when you're really upset or you're really, dysfunctional or you're really feeling it, then you'll feel motivated to take the steps.
Thank you, Doctor. It's actually interesting ways of dealing with it. I think we left 3 minutes with us, so you have to go for iftar, Doctor.
Yeah, a few more minutes, inshallah.
Inshallah, you can still be with us, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. We on the question of sorry, I'm looking at it. I'm diagnosed with anxiety or anything, but I do go through a situation where I doubt or was whether I have taken my wudu properly, whether I have switched off the iron, or whether I have locked the door when I left the house or leave the house. Even at times whether I pray, I forgot the praying, whether I pray or not. Right? This make me anxious though. I don't know if that can be considered anxiety. Do you have any advice on how I can overcome this doubt which affect my daily life routines? Doctor?
Yeah, so OCD is actually a type of anxiety. You know, it's a very specific way in which anxiety manifests in your life. So you become obsessive, compulsive, you start to repeat actions, you start to double check yourself, triple check yourself. You're always worried about a certain outcome, so you try to do something to counter that outcome. It's all based on worry and fear. And it's just a very narrow form of anxiety. But the more general sense of anxiety is you're fearful, you're worrying about something in the future that could happen. And if you get really what we call catastrophic thinking, you start to think the worst is going to happen, and you assume always the worst is going to happen. So I think recognizing first that it's part of a larger type of fear that you're facing. Why is it that you're feeling so fearful about, checking these things over and over? Did I do this right over and over? So, I mean, one of the initial things to do is just see how much of it you can ignore, because these are little messages that just come to your mind and say like, hey, check this again. Oh, you need to do this again. Oh, did you pray salah? Maybe you need to do your salah again. Like, you have to at some point trust your own ability as a human being to function and ignore a lot of these whisperings, the waswasa that comes in an obsessive mind. Especially when it's on things that you should be, you're relatively well grounded in. You're confident that you're a Muslim who prays, you're a Muslim who can follow these basic rules. Then that's it. You don't need to like obsess over it, and assume, and I think that's the beauty of like Islam, where it's like you build upon what you build upon your yaqeen of what you have yaqeen in. So, we do our salah, and if we're not sure if we prayed the right rak'ah, we just remember how many did we pray, and then we just add on to that. Like, in the end, it doesn't matter exactly what the objective reality is. It's what is your own effort. So we have to keep that in mind, keep that level of confidence in your own day-to-day functioning there. And then the idea of other fears that keep kind of creeping in, you need to have like some way to distract yourself from that, some way to set up a routine where you can kind of eliminate your mind from going into those dark corners and those repetitive corners. And then also realize that maybe you're a very like conscientious person. Maybe you're very perfectionist kind of person. And then some of those tendencies can actually be used for good. Like you can become very diligent. You can become, some of these people can be very detail oriented because they're so focused, they're so obsessive. So in many realms of your life, it actually can help you on things, but it can interfere and can be quite problematic as well in other parts of your life. So I think finding a way to ignore it as much as you can, finding other strategies to distract yourself from those thoughts and structure your day in a way where you don't have to go into those thought processes is useful. But then also cutting yourself some slack, like if you're a little bit obsessive, okay, it's fine. Some people are just like that, it's not, don't over pathologize yourself either. And you'll know when you're really in a debilitating state. You will simply not be able to function. And there are certain people who check their door so many times that they can't even get to work, because they kept coming back to the house to check. There are people who, if it's in those like very, very extreme examples, then you would, probably need to seek professional help. Maybe there's like some strategies that you can learn in these weekly kind of sessions. Maybe medication might be appropriate for you. I don't know. It's not always the case, but that, it would behoove you to get professional input if it's to that level of significant impairment.
Inshallah, Doctor. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your time. I think it's your iftar time right now.
Yeah, I'll have to excuse myself. Please remember me all in your du'as.
Inshallah, thank you. Allah bless you. Okay, now we left with Shaykh Abdul Aziz, inshallah. Shaykh, I'd like to ask you this. first question about someone who needs to deal with his past about his father's infidelity that affect his life until today, right? He said, Salam Shaykh Abdul Aziz. For many years, from the time I was born, my mother had went through acts of infidelity for my father. My mother stuck through the marriage to raise her children till this day. Throughout my growing up years, I would always be the one that my mother would confide in me about her problems. I learned to be her pillar of support, and I learned to be strong. However, it has taken a toll in my own life and quest for a love relationship. I have anxiety getting married because I'm worried that I will not be a responsible person or a man, husband, or I will hurt the one I love. Do you have any advice how I can break through? I'm crying while writing this to you.
Oh, this is a very difficult case, difficult situation. And perhaps it's maybe more appropriate that we get an opportunity to talk a little bit more privately about this, because it's quite a sensitive topic.
Okay.
But if I can talk in general terms, you need to get a balance when you go into a marriage, and you go into that marriage with burdens, so to speak, that are burdening you. And the word baggage is really quite appropriate in this sentence. In this sense, is sometimes you go into a marriage with with what we call these athqal, these weights of your past. Now, you need to balance up how much of that weight do I need to share with my partner, future partner, and how much I should hide. And generally, hiding is completely permitted, because people don't need to know everything about everything in your life, especially when it's something which is an aib, something which is a fault of somebody, yourself or somebody else's. Because there's a hadith which is very clear that the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man satara awrata akhi, satara Allah awratahu yawm al-qiyamah." Whoever hides the faults of his brother, or in this case, the mother, Allah will hide his faults on the day of judgment. So, alhamdulillah, for this person to have supported his mother, his reward will be enormous. But it's taken a toll. Now, that in general, what you need to do is when you go into a relationship, you need to think, how much of this burden will I now be bringing into this relationship that will damage the other party of this relationship? And if it's dealt with, for example, to give a different kind of example, to take it away from this very specific example, if somebody used to smoke, for example, or drink when they were a teenager, and they get married at 30, and they haven't drunk or smoked for 10 years or more, and the days of those, and they don't have that past, there's no need for that. For example, there may not be any benefit in telling their partner, "Oh, by the way, when I was a teenager, I used to smoke or I used to drink." However, if that is still a burden in their life, and they crave these things all of their time, and it's bringing them down, and then it might be appropriate that they talk this through at some point before the marriage, early in the marriage. So you need to weigh up, what do you hide from a partner, legitimately hide, because it is acceptable in Islam to hide those things of the past, if you've moved on from them, and what do you need to share. It sounds to me from this case that there may be some difficulties moving forward, and that's why perhaps that person needs to get a little bit more help. And like I say, if there's anything I can do, I'm at your service, to you personally and to the person that's asking the question. And of course, there are better qualified people than me. Omar's gone to break his fast, but I'm sure there's other more qualified people there in Singapore that maybe she should get some help talking to. Like I say, I'm here as well.
Thank you, Shaykh. We will send his contact with you, inshallah. We will discuss.
Oh.
Thank you, Shaykh, for your explanation and also getting in details and contacting the person so that he can, move along with it, inshallah. Next question, Shaykh. In the last session, Facebook Live, you mentioned that how you deal with a person who has a depression really depend on their current state. I have a question here related to that. Shaykh, my son attempted suicide once. He is 16 years old. I'm not sure why he did it though, because our family never really had any issues with abuse and we don't really get into any violent arguments either. Right? So it's a safe family. What I can think of is maybe we have a history of mental illness. One of my uncle has schizophrenia. I'm trying my best to understand, but he refused to confide in me or my husband. What can I do as a parent?
I think there's a principle in what we call one of the nurture principles, which is that every behavior is a form of communication. So whenever a child does something, whenever a child or an adult does something, and in particular a child that is developing, whenever a child does something, any kind of behavior, they're trying to communicate something. So when a child swears, it's not just necessarily the language. There's a meaning behind the swearing, for example. There's a meaning behind the hitting. There's a meaning. So the skill of the nurturer, the person that's looking after that, the carer, the murabbi, as we say in Arabic, the one that's helping to develop this young person, is to try and understand what is being communicated in this behavior. And if the behavior is so extreme as an attempted suicide, the communication has got to be something very, and this is what the person, this mother needs to try and work out. What is that person saying? And often suicide is a case is where it doesn't always have to be that I've been abused. It might just be, I need your love. Or it might be, you've forgotten me. Or, I need you to think about my feelings. You're a great mom. I'm not saying this is the case, but it could be any of these. It doesn't have to be a big story. It doesn't need to be that I'm completely miserable and I'm dying inside, or that I've been abused. Or it might be something which is something very subtle, or it might be that I'm confused. That I just don't know what's right and wrong anymore. So the key question is, what was that communicating? Not try and find a cause, so to speak, to find out what is my son telling me? What is my son telling me? And it might be I'm angry with you. It might be I'm angry with myself, or it might be I just didn't get the right marks at work and at school. So try and work out what is the communication here, especially if it's a one-off. Then it might be that the key. It might just be that something around that time, rather than a deep inbuilt trauma that the child is going through, or some really serious psychological issue. So communication is a key there, and this principle, every action or every behavior is communication, is very important in this.
Thank you, Shaykh, for that. I think we also learned, and whenever we came through that, we can relate to what you are teaching us. Inshallah. The next question.
Can I just give an example?
Okay,
of somebody that, a child said to his mother, this is very recently, he come to me, I don't believe in heaven anymore. The child says, I don't believe in heaven. Didn't say I don't believe in God anymore. And I thought, when the mother was talking, so when does he ever talk about heaven? And she said it's usually when we go to bed. And she used to talk about the garden and heaven and things. And so I says, how was he feeling at the time when he said he didn't believe in heaven? She said, I'd just done this. She did something, and he became angry with her. So he didn't believe in heaven anymore. What he was trying to say, he was trying to almost hurt his mother by saying, all of those good times that we had when I was lying in bed talking about heaven, they don't mean anything anymore to me because you upset me and I don't like you anymore, mummy. So that's what he was communicating. What he actually said, if you take it literally, is kufr. I don't believe in heaven anymore.
Mm.
Did he really commit kufr? No. What he did, he said, you upset me, mum, and I'm going to upset you now because the one thing that really bonded me and you was our heaven talk. And so the thing that I can hurt you the most with is to say I don't believe in heaven. And fortunately, she says, are you angry with me? And he said, yes. And so then they talked about what had made her. And then in the end, she says, do you really not believe in heaven? And he says, of course I believe in heaven. But if she reacted to that thing, which is clearly kufr, I mean, technically, that's disbelief to say, it's a serious matter. So it's a serious spiritual suicide as opposed to physical suicide. But getting to understand what was the meaning, what's the communication is very, very important. And so if, for example, your child does make a statement of kufr or commit suicide, it might actually be something very simple. It doesn't have to be one of the big things. Often, apologies for extending that answer.
Thank you, Shaykh. It's very interesting, actually. Thank you for sharing. Another question is about procrastination. I read that procrastination and mental block is related a lot to our emotional turmoil, such as anxiety. Is it so? Are there any tips you would give for someone?
Can you just sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't quite get that first part.
He said that I read that procrastination, that means you delay the work that you do, and mental block is related a lot to our emotional turmoil, such as anxiety. Is it so? Is it true? That means, are there any tips you would give for someone who has a procrastination problem, delaying issues? Yeah.
The tasweef is what we call in Arabic procrastination, is to delay things, and procrastination can be for lots of different reasons. One of the in Islamic terms, one of the reasons for procrastination is because you think you're going to live forever, or what we call in Arabic tul al-amal. There's this long hope, extended hope. So you don't go for Hajj because you think, oh, I can do this when I'm old. And this is one of the reasons, one of the major reasons for procrastination. And it's one of the most dangerous things, procrastinating in the deen. So, and procrastination in the deen is really what's dangerous. Procrastination in the dunya, in the temporal world, is not that serious and that dangerous. And that's why Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh used to say that when you live for the akhirah as if you will die tomorrow, and live in the deen, live in the dunya, in this temporal world, as if you will live forever. In other words, when it comes to, you hear it's Ramadan, you fast. You don't, I'll fast next year. But when it comes to things about buying a new car, it's okay. I will live forever. No, I can buy that next year. I can buy that next year. It's not that important. So you need to think, why am I procrastinating? So get to the root of what the procrastination is. And it might be that it's just it's no harm in this procrastination. When it does become harmful, again, it goes back to that point of debilitation where you're not able to function in your life. In other words, that, I'm not going to fix that wall because, I'm not going to fix that door because I've got forever to do. So you don't fix the door, and then as a result, your wife kills you, or not a good thing to, or you get robbed because you didn't close, you fix the door because now somebody just breaks it. So It's what is the outcome of the procrastination? What is the motivation behind it? It can be, and the question was, can it be because of anxiety? Yeah, anxiety can be a problem. Going back to the OCD question, I have a very personal experience of this because I was joking that people called me Mr. OCD. I haven't been diagnosed with OCD, but there was a time where I literally used to drive to I had a roundabout near my house. So I'd drive to the roundabout, go around the roundabout and come back to the house and check if I've locked the door. I'll drive again. I would do this about 10, 15 times. And as Dr. Omar said, when it gets to that point that it stops you from getting to work, which it did, then that means that level of anxiety that I had debilitated me. Fortunately, I was in a kind of job, I was in a management job where I was in charge of my own time. But what it taught me was that there was something more serious going on in my life than just my, the anxiety was much more deep down. So here, going back to the question, anxiety, if it's procrastinating, what is the reason for it? What is the roots for it? And what is the impact on it? Okay, in my OCD at work, like I say, they used to call me Mr. OCD. And what they deliberately used to do is they used to leave their cups after they're drunk. They used to leave it on my desk because they know I'll come into the office, I'll be so upset with it, and I'll wash the cups. So nobody ever washed any cups because they knew that Mr. OCD will do it. Now, that didn't really cause me any serious problems. It's just, so in the case of my not getting to work, does this procrastination leave me in a difficult, vulnerable state? Does it leave, is it bad for me spiritually, physically, in terms of my job? And if it's not, procrastination is not the end of the world if it's in worldly matters. As in religious matters, in the deen matters, then it is. Because as Sayyidina Ali said, tasweef, this delay is often because of you think you will live forever, so you postpone things. What's the answer to that? Is to think about death. That's the answer, is to remember death as often as possible. Just to lie on the ground. The yogis have a position called the corpse position. And this is actually part of Islam, is to stop and think about death. And some of our teachers, there's one teacher that's well known, said on the Iftar, he dug his own grave many years before he died. And every night he would go and lie in it to remind him that this is where he would be buried. So just to think about death will then wake you up, so to speak, in terms of the deen. And that's the answer if it's in the deen. If it's in the dunya, then look for the reasons, look for the outcome.
Inshallah, Shaykh, thank you for the details explanation. Inshallah, we learned so much from it, and I think I also can look into it myself. Like, inshallah. Shaykh, you mentioned, this is the next question. You mentioned about co-reflection. However, what if you don't really have someone who you can talk to that understand you, right? Not everybody has that kind of the right circle. Sometimes you also don't have the money to go for therapy. So what is the best options for someone like me? Any advice?
There's what we call munaja, which is where you talk directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is actually a really, really powerful part of your spiritual process, is to lay your needs and your concerns in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you look at how Sayyidina Zakaria made his dua, the Prophet Sayyidina Zakaria made his dua for a child. How did he start? He says, I complain to you about my bones. My bones are feeble. My hair is grey. So this is the first thing. First thing he does in his dua is he lays down his complaint, so to speak, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he asks him for guidance, ask him for what he wishes for. Now there's a real sir, a real secret, a real power in this process, which is where you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you say, I have a problem, and this is Allah knows what the problem is, but articulating that problem, as Sayyidina Zakaria did, is really, really powerful. And it's the means by which the dua is answered. It's one of these means. Now, I mentioned about my mother. One of my teachers, Shaykh Muhammad Malamali, who passed away recently, rahmatullah alayhi, he didn't used to call me often. But I remember once, out of the blue, he just called me and he says, tonight, when you get up in the night to go to the toilet, you say these words. And he's like telling me off on the phone. خطبت رحالي بباب الكريم وناديته في ظلام الدجى فقلت إلهي أقلت أثرتي فيسر الأسر مخرجا. He says, say these words. I place my baggage at the door of the generous one. خطبت رحالي بباب الكريم وناديته في ظلام الدجى. And I call him in the darkness of the night. He didn't say, get up and pray, do tahajjud, and do this and do this and do that. He says, when you're in that state and you're really in a difficult place, just put your baggage in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, this is a mess. This is what's happened to me. This is this is that. And I'm placing my baggage in front of Al-Bab al-Kareem. When I daytuhu fi dhulam al-duja, and I'm calling him in the darkness of the night. فَقُلْتُ إِلَهِ, I say, oh my God, قَلَّتْ أَثْرَتِي. I don't have any means. I don't have any friends. I don't have any money. I can't go to therapists. I can't do this and I can't do this. Help me. And that process is actually the most powerful process of all. More powerful than the other parts, the other things like co-reflection, as I mentioned, therapy, all of these things are all important. But the most powerful one is this where you turn in munajat to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you may have been cut off from therapy, from co-reflection, from dhikr, or whatever it might be. But if you're sincere in placing your baggage at the door of your Lord, you will find that the answer will come. And you don't need to be, like he said, and that's why he said specifically, I remember his call very, very clearly. He says, when you go to the toilet tonight, not when you get up to pray. He says, when you just do it. You don't need to be in a pure state or in this. Just when you're in a real mess, just put it at the door of the Kareem. And the thing about doing it in the late part of the night is really powerful, because that's when you're purest in your relationship with him. There's no distractions. You don't have the internet. You don't have people around you. You leave your phone away, and then you just talk to him. So inshallah, that's the key to this person and every one of us. And inshallah, we'll find satisfaction, inshallah.
Inshallah. I mean, we left with two questions. I couldn't continue with a lot more questions. I think Shaykh will be tired. He also need to rest for his iftar, inshallah. Shaykh, the next question that I'd like to share with you is quite similar to the one, but this is slightly different. I was diagnosed with depression a few years ago. I grew up watching my parents argue all the time. And later on, they got divorced. Somehow this affects me. I never really wanted to get married, but few people are always telling me to get married, as though this will solve all my problems. And my depression will go away. Is it wrong not to want to get married? It's not something that I can force myself to accept it.
I think I'm not sure I got everything there, but hopefully I got enough. So if somebody's going into a marriage similar to the other situation, somebody's going into a marriage where they're depressed, the outcome of this could be that the marriage is the answer to the problem. And in the case of my debilitating situation I described earlier, actually the marriage was the answer to that, because I've never had that difficulty since getting married. And alhamdulillah, in some ways the marriage was a means by which it helped me to deal with the difficulties that I was facing in my life. And so there's potential there in the marriage to be the answer to all of this person's problems. However, at the same time, marriage also has many risks when you go into it without, and you, as I say, you're bringing in baggage, which is, you can't marry somebody and expect that the marriage will be the key to serious problems. I'll give you an example of the answer to a lot of people's sexuality problems is to get married. But because I think I'm gay, therefore I'm going to get married. And that's a very, very common theme that I've, and there's cases where they say, I know I'm gay, but my parents want me to get married. And that's not that can't work well, because you're coming into a relationship expecting that somehow this marriage is going to solve a crisis or an issue that it's inside that person. So in that case, that person needs to deal with that before they go into the marriage. So the question of the question that's being put is, how should I deal with potential marriage? If that potential marriage is a means by which you feel that it can take you out of this and can be the answer, then inshallah go into it fully. But if you don't feel that you're ready, if the person doesn't feel that they're ready and that there are serious issues that need to be dealt with, you have to deal with them before going into the marriage. But if you just ignite, oh, I'm not going to deal with them and I'm not going to get married, then you've not gone anywhere. And that seems to be the position that you could fall into. I'm not going to listen to everybody else. I'm not going to get married, and I'm not going to get help either. You do one or the other.
Yeah.
Or both. You know, get married and get help as well. But certainly that's what the person needs to start thinking about.
Thank you, Shaykh. The next question here is, every night, I hope you can listen to me clearly, son. Every night, I have to come back to a home which is not like a home to me. My family member is causing me so much stress and anxiety at home. Always about how I am useless as a daughter and lazy, never do any housework. But they never see the things I had done and still I'm doing it. And this is causing me depression. How do I recover from this?
Going back to how we started the whole thing was that one of the medicines, so to speak, that the Prophet ﷺ gave us was in this phrase, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power, there is no ability except from Allah. And one of the reasons why this helps with anxiety and depression is because it takes the power of a situation like this, because one of the reasons why it brings that person down, the girl down, is because the power that they've given to the other person who puts them down is greater than they deserve. Even if it's their mother or their father that's pulling them down, they don't, if they know in themselves that they're doing what they need to do, then the fact that their mother doesn't see it, if you continually say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, it will take the power from that they have over that person. Because what we've got here is a power arrangement where that the girl is coming home and is being abused or mistreated by the more powerful one in the household. Now, to build the person's strength and confidence in themselves, this la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah will help them to deal with that relationship. And that's one of the elements of this. The other is to try and get that balance right in terms of dealing with those people. It might be that sometimes you just need to up the amount, and other times you might need to talk to them and say, look, I did this and I did that. So there has to be a host of things, but this is one of the key things, is to say regularly, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And this will help with anxiety a great deal. Some of the scholars say to do 10 in the morning, 10 in the daytime, and 10 at night. So it's spread out. It's a small amount, 10, 10, 10. Others say if you can do more, 100, 100, 100, it's better. But to spread it out so that your day is continually connected to the fact that actually Allah is the powerful one in this. Allah is the really powerful one, and I'm doing this for Allah. So when you do the extra chores in the house, I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing this for Allah. Allah is the one that's got the power. And once you start to have that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will start to help you to heal, inshallah.
Inshallah, thank you. This is the last question. Thank you, Shaykh, for your time. Inshallah, Allah bless you. I had a couple of relationships, but the men I have been with before always ended up hurting me. I ended up with frequent panic attacks. The last guy I was with told me he wanted to make me his second wife, but in the end, he didn't. Is there something wrong with me, or my choice of men is wrong? It seems like all the men I'm attracted to are not sincere. What is your advice for
I think she's answered her question herself. It's not her, it's her choices. And I think just to go back to something that Dr. Omar had said earlier on, he said that when he's working in therapy, one of the things he talks about how to get people from where they are now to where they want to be is to actually identify what it is that they want. And one of the best ways in terms of marriage is to look at what would the ideal husband be, what are the qualities, and then to start to then think who has these qualities, and why was I attracted to this? Not to detach those people, but to think, what is the ideal husband? What is the kind of husband that I'm looking for? What do I want from that person? And if you're sincere in that, it is probably going to be the opposite of what she actually chose.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably what's going to happen here. That what she really wants is this, but for some reason, she always seems to be attracted to that. So maybe by articulating what it is that she actually wants, she might be able to identify why she's going wrong. And that might be to say, what is this ideal husband? And then she's not going to get it. That's the other thing, is that people, if you set up an ideal husband, but at least she will get an direction. These are some of the qualities of what that ideal husband might have. And therefore, when I see some of them, then that should be something that I find attractive. And that's where perhaps the sister should be starting to move in that direction, inshallah. And that's something that she can start working on straight away.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Shaykh, very much for all your time, your wisdom, your knowledge and advices. We appreciate very much, and most importantly, we are very happy to see you. And we always, we always learn so much from you. May Allah preserve you, Shaykh. Inshallah, we see you tomorrow night, Sunday. We left, maybe 7 days of Ramadan, how time flies. So before we end tonight, Singapore is already 9. We need your dua, closing dua, inshallah.
ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم الطف بنا بتيسير العسير فإن تيسير كل عسير عليك يسير. اللهم الطف بنا بتيسير العسير فإن تيسير العسير عليك يسير. اللهم الطف بنا بتيسير العسير فإن تيسير العسير عليك يسير. اللهم الطف بنا يا رب، اللهم الطف بنا فيما نزال إنك لطيف لم تزال، والطف بنا والمسلمين. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وسلم. اللهم افتح لنا بالخير واختم لنا بالخير واجعل عواقب امورنا بالخير بيدك الخير والعافيه انك على كل شيء قدير. دعواهم فيها سبحانك اللهم وتحيتهم فيها السلام واخر دعواهم ان الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you, Shaykh.
جزاكم الله خيرا. Thank you very much.
We love you. We hope to see you tomorrow night.
Love you too.
Assalamualaikum. Alhamdulillah, just now was a very interesting discussion on living with depression and anxiety. Of course, there are a lot more we can discuss, but due to time limit and not enough ways, extending it, I think everybody is very tired already. Maybe we will organize it again, inshallah. But tomorrow also we will continue this program with Sheikh Jihad Brown tomorrow morning 9 a.m. It's going to be an interesting talk, right? Like in the pandemic times, alhamdulillah. And then that will be at 9 a.m. Singapore time. And then at 5 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. we will start Amin Yusof. This will be another interesting one. You will never walk alone. Yeah, not only Liverpool fans can watch it, everyone can watch it. And tomorrow night also, Shaykh Abdul Aziz will be his regular dars online from 40 principles from Ihya Ulumuddin Imam Ghazali. This time he's going to touch on patience. Yeah, it's very important to learn about patience, right? Because we are always impatient. So inshallah, we look forward to tomorrow and on these remaining Ramadan days and night. Please remember us in your dua. We will dua for you too. And with this, I'd like to say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.